Welcome back to our last reading in our first Rastafari historical series reading, The Black Jews of Africa, History, Religion, Identity. And I left off on the last chapter, which was chapter 10, African Jews in Eastern and Southern Africa, on discovering the Lemba's past through their genes. It's a shame the Lemba have to do these DNA tests or whatever. However, let it be a vindication for the Lemba, who for many, many, many years were stating that they were Hebrews, but the so-called just they couldn't take that truth. So let's continue with discovering the Lemba's past through their genes. The Lemba's oral tradition recounts that the first Lemba coming from Senna in the north were men who married African women. Professor Spurtle and Jenkins of the South African Institute for Medical Research and the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, using this information as a basis, had the idea of trying to solve the mystery of the Lemba's origin by collecting and analyzing the genetic material. Spurtle and Jenkins reasoned as follows. By identifying the Y chromosomes of the Lemba and establishing similarities with Jewish groups around the world, it might be possible to support a hypothesis of Jewish origin for the male lineage of the Lemba. On the basis of 64 DNA samples taken from male Lemba, Spurtle and Jenkins carried out a first analysis in which they established that 50% of the Lemba's Y chromosomes were of Semitic origin and 40% were Negroid, with the remaining 10% unidentified. The conclusion of the two researchers suggested a genetic history quite consistent with the Lemba's oral tradition, and the results of their study found a wide audience in the 1990s. Parfit's involvement in studying ethnic groups purporting to be descendant of the lost tribes led him to spend several months among them, as related in his Journey to the Vanished City, 1991. The publication of Parfit's book was followed by numerous television and radio broadcasts. Such coverage by the media brought the Lemba to the attention of a large international public, whereas until then their existence was virtually unknown even in their own country. The BBC subsequently broadcast a series entitled Origins, and Professor Stephen James, a geneticist at University College in London, published a book in the section on the Lemba. While the terminology Semitic genes lacks precision as such, the genetic bomb of the Black Jews of South Africa had exploded. Sometime later, to test the hypothesis of a possible South Arabian origin of the Lemba, and to check similarities between the structure of Lemba clans and their names against Hadramaut clans and their family names, Parfit undertook a comparison between South Arabians and Lemba's DNA. He collected DNA from 136 male Lemba for the Center for Genetic Anthropology at the University College of London in 1997. In order to establish a comparison, the next step consisted of collecting DNA from South Arabians in the region of the Hadramaut to establish a more precise evaluation of the paternal heritage of the Lemba. This team of researchers envisaged that the Jewish origins of the Lemba could be corroborated by a similarity between the Lemba's Y chromosomes and those of Jewish men living in other parts of the world. In a study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 2000, the Y chromosomes of 136 Lemba were compared to the Y chromosomes of Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews, as well as Yemen and non-Lemba Bantu speakers from southern Africa. The researchers found evidence of Semitic origins in the Lemba, although it was not clear whether this origin was Jewish, Arab, or both. All right, they did mix. Don't think they didn't mix with other people. You'd be foolish to not comprehend that. At a certain point in time. All right. Interestingly, the study showed that one of the Lemba clans carried a high occurrence of a particular Y chromosome, the Cohen modal haplotype, which is known to be characteristic of the paternally inherited Jewish priesthood, and is thought more generally to be a potential signature of Judaic origin. According to the Bible, Moses and Aaron were members of the tribe of Levi, selected for certain religious duties. Ever since, male descendants of Aaron have been designated Kohanim, or priests, and the designation of Jewish males to this priestly status continues to this day. Through the male line, and determined by strict patrilineal descent, one might expect that male members of the Kohanim would carry similar Y chromosomes. An earlier study, based on a sample of 306 Jewish males from Israel, Canada, and the United Kingdom, had shown the diversity of the Levites' Y chromosomes and the homogeneity of the Kohanim's Y chromosomes, and that this particular haplotype was spread among both Ashkenazic and Sephardic Kohanim. Following this study, the identification of the CMH among men belonging to various allegedly Jewish groups appeared to provide evidence for claims of Jewish ancestry. The frequency of the CMH was high in the subclan of the Buba, that interestingly is composed of Lemba priests, where more than 50% of the men tested have this haplotype. In comparison, Levites carried only 3%, and among the general Jewish population, about 10%. The fact that the Lemba share some of the markers found in other Jewish populations could indicate that in the past, one or more Jews introduced this gene without, however, making it possible to specify the geographical origin or time period in which this occurred. Finally, the results of a study carried out by an international team of scientists led by Michael Hammer from the University of Arizona and Beersheba Bonnet Tamir from the University of Tel Aviv, published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science in 1999. The study, using genetic samples taken from 1,371 men in 7 different Jewish populations: Ashkenazi, Roman, North African, Kurd, Near Eastern, Yemenite, and Ethiopian, and 16 non-Jewish groups, including the Lemba, indicated that the Lemba's Y chromosomes were closer to those of the Jews than were those of any other sub-Saharan African group. What did these surveys really teach us with respect to the Lemba's genealogy? In fact, the genetic studies simply established a non-African paternal descent for the Lemba. The intriguing presence of the Cohen modal haplotype supported to some extent the hypothesis of their possible Jewish origin, without nonetheless providing any absolute proof. If there were no doubts about the highly technical procedures of genetic studies, it clearly appeared that the shockwave caused by the revelation of a Bantu Jewish population obviously dominated the scientific popularization elsewhere, not just among the various Jewish communities throughout the world. In May 9th, 1999, a New York Times headline that read "DNA backs a tribe's tradition of early descent from the Jews" was followed by the French science magazine Science et Vie, August 1999, August 2000, which asserted that the Lemba were Jews, while Hadassah magazine in January 2001 considered that the Jewish ancestry of the Lemba on the male side seems assured. Media accounts reported the tracing of the genetic ancestry of the Lemba as if genetic tests had authoritatively settled the question, although the actual answers to these questions are far more complex. It was against this murky background, linking different and contradictory levels of racial thought and scientific explanations, mingled with the vivid legend of the 12 tribes, that the genetic studies on the Lemba were received. Given the vast potential for misunderstanding or misuse of these categorizations, it was comforting for Jews and non-Jews to believe that there was some comparatively simple way to identify Jews. And simultaneously consolidating and undermining traditional notions, the media headlines spreading news of the genetic studies linking the Lemba to Jews, with photos showing them wearing Jewish religious attributes, skull caps, prayer shawls, and talit, presented striking images. The DNA results provided proof of their Jewishness for the Lemba themselves and for Jewry in general, thus initiating redevelopment of their social and religious identity. Immediately thereafter, Kalanu sent a Jewish teacher, Yaakov Levi, whose mission was to bring the Lemba normative Judaism. Two missions of Rabbi Leo Abrami, an American rabbi of French origin, were also sent by Kalanu in January and September of 2002. In January of 2002, I was present in Venda at a conference during Rabbi Abrami's first mission and was able to watch how he taught the history of Judaism to the Lemba, encouraging them to choose Judaism and to exclude Christian elements. He also taught them rudiments of the Hebrew alphabet using his own personal method. Above all, he organized with the members of the community gathered at this conference a Shabbat, a Sabbath according to Jewish norms. Rabbi Abrami brought the Lemba copies of various books on theology, a copy of the new JPS Hebrew-English Bible, Hebrew handbooks, hundreds of leaflets about the practice of the Shabbat, the Sabbath, and other instructional materials for the Lemba Cultural Association's library and the future synagogue. In September 2002, when Parfit attended the annual meeting of the Lemba Cultural Association, he noticed that for the first time the Lemba made it coincide with the Jewish New Year, and also for the first time used a member of Hebrew expressions such as Shana Tova for a good year. Shana. Fully aware of the importance of media coverage of genetic tests on the Lemba, Parfit decided in 2003 to assess the reception and integrations of the results of the genetic tests in Zimbabwe and South Africa. His method of evaluation included an in-depth conversations based on 120 detailed questionnaires. 70% of the Lemba were surveyed. Of those, 93% of the educated participants and 53% of the unskilled knew about the tests. Only 11% of those who knew about the tests knew the results. When asked about the purpose of the test, 48% of those who knew about the test answered that it concerned blood. 30% thought that blood was the link between Lemba and Jews. And only a few persons answered that it was about genes or DNA. As regards questions about how the tests had influenced the life of their community, the majority did not answer, and some answered that they did not know about the results. Though those who answered those who answered that they knew about the tests stated that it was now established that the Lemba were Jews. Prior to the genetic tests, the Lemba asserted their identity through oral tradition and religious and/or cultural practices. The preliminary interviews carried out in 1997 by Leroux revealed vague remarks. We are different from other tribes. We are a holy people. Our God is different. These things remind us of who we are. Since the genetic tests and the relationship established with members of the international Jewish community, one can see the awareness in their group of a new ethnic and religious identity that is based largely on their understanding of the genetic research passed on by the media. What do we know about the consequences of this genetic research on other Judaizing African societies? Most of the leaders of other African Judaizing communities dispose of modern means of communication. Some of them geographically close to the Lemba knew about the research and had integrated it into their own affiliation to Judaism. For example, Kosintahi Niati Mbolekwa from the community of Zimbabwe expressed himself as follows. I am so pleased and proud to see such great efforts finally being made in addressing the significant genetic finds made by Parfit and others. These are rather interesting and ground-shaking discoveries. But this information has been known for centuries. I have relatives and friends from the Lemba tribe, and we have always known that all Bantus are Israelites. But more than just the Lemba are Jews. The Lemba are just one major group of Jews that settled in southern Africa, but a much larger picture can be drawn of our entire inheritance. The Yoruba, the Hausa, the Ashanti, the Buganda, and many other tribes in Africa have made public and open their Jewish roots, but on deaf, or can I say outright racist ears, who find these claims outlandish. In 2003, a delegation from the community of Zimbabwe participated in the Lemba annual conference held in Venda. Ernest Nandi Sadiki, one of the members of the Zimbabwean delegation, took this opportunity to announce that in our endeavor to bring the Lemba of Zimbabwe to their true identity, we will be holding our inaugural national conference at Tadzembwa in the Masvingo province, close to the historical Zimbabwe, now known as Great Zimbabwe, which I understand was built by our forefathers out of the blue, for in no Jewish or non-Jewish source are they even hinted at. The Lemba have been proposed as Jews by virtue of a genetic tie to Jews elsewhere and by the mass media's oversimplification of the results of genetic tests. The way in which these results have been presented by the media and the way in which these presentations have been transformed into group narratives have played a major role in the impact of genetics on group identity issues from Africa to Asia. While we have no direct information enabling us to evaluate the consequences of the genetic tests of the Lemba on Judaizing communities located farther away, particularly those of Central and Western Africa, we must realize that the complete Lemba history has become accessible on the internet through a multitude of search possibilities. For instance, Herman Taylor, the minister of the Shalom Hebrew Israelite congregation of Jackson, Mississippi, following the media coverage of the findings on Lemba DNA, expressed his satisfaction that the kinship between his group and Israelite populations of Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, Sudan, Nigeria, Uganda, and Malawi had been proven in such a conclusive way. It is highly likely that the impact of these scientific findings has affected other people's own narratives and sense of their own origins. Given the increased technological access to information throughout the world, it is fairly certain that DNA research on group origins is one of the contemporary elements likely to modify the consciousness of such groups. All right, Zionist and Israelite churches in South Africa. Most of the Lemba informants indicated that they belong to some kind of Christian church, essentially the Zion Apostolic Church, ZAC, or the Zion Christian Church, which now constitute the majority of so-called African independent churches in South Africa and elsewhere in Africa. Among these churches, which were founded in 1910 and 1920s, some describe themselves as Zionists without having much in common with Jewish Zionism. In fact, they represent Black Zion, a charismatic religious movement of Africans. The name was taken from biblical references to Mount Zion in Jerusalem, based in part on the inspiration of a similar community in Illinois. These churches are a prominent part of African Christianity and emerged in a context in which Africans were denied social, economic, and religious power, while mission churches dominated by Europeans often represented colonial oppression. All right, in general, the beliefs of these Zionist churches are eclectic. They have exercised mutatis mutandis, a choice from among cults and sacred books, added fasts, immersion, and possession and purification rites, and praised their founder, depending on the personality of the prophet who guides them. The principal sacred reference figures are Moses, and Johannes, John the Baptist. Their churches' practices are often rigorous. They forbid alcoholic beverages, smoking, or eating pork, and have, in a way, assimilated dietary and purification elements from the Old Testament. From the same sphere of influence came the movement of the Israelites, which developed in South Africa in the 1920s under the leadership of Enoch Mgijima. Mgijima was an evangelist in the Methodist Church who began to have millennial visions and felt called to proclaim a return to the ancient religion of the Israelites. He then joined the Church of God and Saints of Christ, founded in the United States by the African-American William Crowdy in 1896. As seen earlier, Crowdy claimed to have received a visitation from God and was told to recreate the religion of the biblical Jews. Crowdy claimed to have received a visitation from God and was told to recreate the religion of the biblical Jews for the black people. He is considered a founder of the first African American Jewish movement. When he was asked to leave the Church of God and Saints of Christ in 1919, Mgijima was the undisputed leader among the Israelites, and many of them moved to Ntabalanga, where he lived, to draw near the prophet. For the authorities, however, this was illegal squatting on crown land, and a dispute over land rights arose and continued throughout the 1920s. The Israelites argued their case with the authorities on a number of occasions, always maintaining that they were answerable only to God. After several incidents of defiance, the Israelites became more and more aggressive, began to arm themselves, and seemed resigned to the inevitable. In the tragic outcome of the confrontation with authorities known as the Bolshevik Tragedy 1921, 163 Israelites died. 129 were wounded, and the others, including Mgijima, were made prisoners. The Israelites movement, however, still exists in the Queenstown area. Some socio-political factors of the time, the quantity and quality of the land available to black people, were to play a part in the community set up by the Israelites. But overall, its members who suffered perpetual discrimination were in search of a status and ontological aura based on the model of the black Jewish American communities from which they sprang. They consider themselves as the chosen people of Yahweh, of Jehovah, whom their prophet came to free from the yoke of the whites. In the South Africa of discrimination, they needed to choose their own religious commitment, not one imposed by whites or anyone else. The Black Philadelphia Church of Soweto, a similar religious group, was founded in the 1960s by Vayesile Joshua Misitisana, born into a Xhosa family and raised as a Methodist. After meeting two Palestinian Jews while serving with the British during World War II, Misitana noticed similarities between the Jewish and the Xhosa cultures and felt that what was not similar, I really admired. Subsequently, he intensified his study of Judaism, and as the name Philadelphia came to him in a dream, he founded the Black Philadelphia Church, first in Bloemfontein, In 1963, after undergoing conversion by an Orthodox rabbi, Mrs. Sana led his followers to Judaism, saying, "I finally decided that we must have faith that we have chosen voluntarily. Not one of the white man or anyone else has forced upon us." He added, "In Judaism, I see the opportunity to unite and pull ourselves up as a people." In the ghetto township of Soweto, this was how 1,000 people were groping for Judaism, learning badly pronounced Hebrew and worshiping on Saturday. Aside from Misitsana himself, no member of the Black Philadelphia Church in Soweto has undergone any form of recognized conversion. All that can be said of them is that they wanted to be Jews, saw themselves as such, and practice a very elementary form of Judaism. Although he has been soliciting white Jewry for several years with no success, Mrs. Sana's attempts to have his movements accepted have failed. His application to the Johannesburg City Council for a site for a synagogue was also turned down. When he requested assistance from both the Orthodox and Reformed South African Jewish communities, he received no reply. Nevertheless, it seems that anyone who met Mrs. Sana's could only be impressed by his sincerity in pursuing Judaism. Unlike his counterparts in Chicago, the black people of Philadelphia make no ancestral claims, basing their faith purely on free choice. And they were at that time willing to undergo conversion or anything else Jewish authorities require in order to be recognized as Jews. Mrs. Sana's religious past provides interesting information on the course of the choice or construction of a Jewish identity among the various independent churches. Since he left the Methodist Church, Mrs. Sana has been a Roman Catholic, Dutch Reformed, Anglican, Seventh-day Adventist, 12th Apostle, Jehovah's Witness, and a member of the Jerusalem and Christ Church, the Jewish Church in Zion, and the Independent Order of True Templars. Man, I thought I went through a lot of religions in School of Thoughts. Wow. In the South Africa of discrimination, the voluntary choice of a religious commitment linked to Judaism clearly expresses the search for autonomy. For autonomy. The search for a status liberated from colonial oppression certainly appealed to people attempting to redefine themselves and to find a source of pride in the white supremacist South Africa. So that will conclude that reading. It's like I said, it's a shame that these ancient Hebrews have to take DNA tests to show and prove that they are original Hebrews. But it's like I said, let it be a vindication and let it be known to the world, or just anybody that may be tuning in right now. This is truth right here staring you in the face. And you could agree with it or you could disagree with it, but the truth will always surface and the light will always shine through the darkness. So let the truth shine. And our next reading will be on the Jews of Rusape, Zimbabwe. So give thanks for tuning in, brothers and sisters. Until next time, salam.